every week you got to keep these things clean. And a firewood processor, we ask a lot of them. They're a tough machine, but they take a lot of abuse, and you just can't treat them like a car where you just don't do anything to them until you trade them in and let someone else have to deal with the headache. We have a weekly clean out that I do, and it also helps to keep it clean around the machine, not just for safety, not just for looks, but because it does play a big role with the health of your machine. And I'll get into that. But watch what I do here today, guys. I'm just going to use my DeWalt leaf blower. We're gonna clean out around the machine, and then we're gonna clean out from underneath it. And then I'll show you what I do once a week, once a month. Right now, I'm also gonna do an end of the month tune-up, and I'll just show you what I do. This is a world-class machine, but you just can't set it and let it go. You got to stay on top of things. Hang out with me, and we're going to get to work. These are the things that we do first before we start cleaning up underneath. We don't have to clean out from underneath it multiple times. I started laying this tarp underneath the perfect split. It does build up after a while. And quite honestly, I let this one go a little bit just for the visual purposes of the clean out for you guys. But it's just something that's got to get done. I had found that laying this tarp under here just makes things so much easier for cleanup. It keeps everything looking nice. More on this later. This extractor works really good. We've got a full tote of sawdust, but there's still some that get spilt underneath. And I always take this time, I bring a leaf rake and we rake all of this out. Again, it looks nice, but there's a reason why, and it is what I've learned about running a processor. So these machines, you know, there's vibrations and shaking, banging around, and they will work their hydraulic fittings loose, and then they'll start leaking hydraulic fluid. Well, if you have a big pile of sawdust underneath there, it soaks it all up and you don't notice it until it's too late. So I keep all of the sawdust down as much as I can underneath. Help me figure out when we got to tighten up the fittings. But there's another step that I do with my machine to help keep that from happening. I've been getting some tears here. This is right on the joint, and some of those sharp shards I've noticed with like the hickory has been tearing into it. So this will have to get replaced sooner than later. Before I rake all of this up, I'm going to take the front panel off of the machine, and we're going to clean out from under there so I don't have to rake twice. And to do that, you need a 13 millimeter. The bottom ones you just loosen. You don't have to take them all the way out. And part of my tools, I keep a magnetic tray around. There you go. So there are a lot of fittings in here, and I'm not saying that over time every single one of them have come loose, but you know, stuff gets shaken loose, especially if it's a brand new machine and it was trucked in on a trailer, or if it's one that's on its own axle. you can expect these fittings, you know, to just shake a little loose, and you just makes good sense to have a wrench handy. About once a month, just touch them, make sure that they're all snug. So for me, I keep 2 wrenches to work on this machine, a 17 millimeter and a metric crescent wrench, which, oh shoot, this is I need the left-handed version, hold on. There we go, left-handed crescent wrench works best. I am also in here looking, you know, for any wet spots, but are there any hoses that are rubbing against others and maybe they're being cut into? And I've never really had any problems with that, but I have had fittings come loose, so I just hit them with the crescent wrench. So here I see I do have a rub that's going on, and I can feel a little dip right here, so we're gonna have to keep an eye on that. What I could do is get some old heater hose and, you know, cut a little piece to go around it just to protect it from cutting into that piece some more. The saw motor gets a lot of action. There are a number of fittings on the saw motor that have to be tightened up. This one here, this one came loose on me one time, and I was getting this fine mist of warm fluid. I didn't know what the heck was going on. It took me a while to figure it out, but this one came loose. So we're just gonna hit these with a crescent wrench, just make sure that everything's tight. The motor is due for an oil change. I'll spare you that, but that's on my list of things to do. Let me get my leaf rake now. We're going to clean up underneath the machine. I just like to keep that area clean. If we do spring a leak, we catch it a lot sooner. Now there are grease fittings on this Japa. There's one on each side of the perfect split. There's one on each side of the main outfeed. And there's one on each side of the perfect clean shaker grate that I hit. When you have a processor over time, you get used to fixing stuff, you get used to working on things. So I've come up with my own Japa 405 toolbox, and it has every tool that I need to make repairs on this machine. The big ones are the 17 millimeter wrench, and that's for all of your belts. We're going to go over that. And obviously the metric crescent wrench. I also have a 24 millimeter wrench, and that's for removing the perfect split. And I have a 1/2 inch socket on a ratchet and hex heads so that I can change out the chain. I am here to tell you the 405 is awesome. I cannot think of there being a better firewood processor for my style of firewood. It's not the ideal firewood processor for a lot of people, but if you are into value-added firewood, if your logs are usually under 16 inches in diameter like mine, I'm telling you, this thing is awesome. It is just fast. It doesn't stop. It has just been completely reliable for me. But, you know, there's some things you got to keep an eye on. The biggest thing for me, and what I would tell anyone that has a machine like this, if it's got the rubber belts, okay, I think chain and feed, maybe it's a little bit lesser maintenance. But if you have belts like mine does, you got to stay on top of them. These are a pre-trip inspection for every time that you run these, and that's why I keep my 17 millimeter wrench as handy as I do, because you are always adjusting this, and your adjustments are on this end. And believe it or not, this belt is I don't need to adjust it right now. I think it's perfect. It's a little off right now just because of the last log that I ran. Sometimes when you run a log and it's got some crook and bend to it, it puts some torque on this belt and it'll get it to walk off to one side. And man, you really see it on the front end, like right here. And you can tell where I've allowed that to happen on occasion, and it's starting to fray the belt. And when I'm running this machine, I have just learned to train my eye right here. I want to see this, you know, I don't want to see too much red over here. That means the belt is running over on this side too far. This is my second belt that I've put on here, and it's taken me 1.5 belts to realize what I was doing wrong, but now I've got this belt mastered. But let me just show you what you do to tighten up this thing. Of course, you got to start it up. 17mm wrench. This is what I use my toolbox for. I just hold the end feet over, and you adjust it by loosening this one and tightening this one. That draws it back and tightens it up. So for instance, here we're out of adjustment. I would want to run this belt back, and that would make the belt track this way. But I know that my belt is really good. So as I've run it, it's just been sitting here running. It's kind of gone back into alignment itself, but I can even, there we go. I'm just saying, I've been doing this long enough now. This belt is dead on, and I like it right where it is. It doesn't need to be any tighter, but these things loosen up, especially a brand new machine. They stretch when they first get used, and you got to snug them up. It's just part of your pre-trip inspection, and this is every time I fire this up, I am on the belts. One thing on my list to replace is this guard. This rubber flapper has just been worn out from the hours, so that's on my list. I have the part that Metsa Machines has sent me. I'll be replacing that. And then the last thing is we have to check on the outfeed. So we are going to use this lever to move the outfeed over. Oop, wrong way. So I am going to lower this because we're going to check the tail end of this. That's how you adjust the outfeed. And here is the tail end of the conveyor. It is a little off center. So how about let's just spend a couple minutes in adjusting this. Again, we just loosen the one bolt and we drive it with the other, and that will allow us to tighten this side, which will allow this to track a little better. Looking good, guys. Rubber belts, got to stay on top of them. I just put on a new chain. The chain's fine. I don't have to mess with it. But this machine, and I'm here to tell you guys, this is the real deal. It is. There's one thing I just want to talk about, a Firewood processor right now. These, and I said this earlier, these are not cars. You just don't drive a processor. You have to operate it. There is a collision of art and science with these machines. They are built for a specific reason and they do it well. But you know, you got to be an operator when you're running them. Please don't take this as me being cocky, because I'm not being cocky right now. This is my third processor. So I started with the Dyna, then to the 365. So I got used to a processor. You just got to understand how they work, because they're all different, but they all do the same thing. They all have their own personality. And I cut my teeth on those previous two processors. For instance, that 365 was a great machine, but man, it would jam up on every run. It's just the way it was. Part of my setup, I bring my toolbox with me for every time I run this machine. I had a sledgehammer that I would just set up against the 365 because I was always pounding a split off of the knife. It would just jam up. Wasn't the end of the world, but again, that 365 I had was, I think, serial number 3, and they had since then made them a little bit stronger with the splitter. But my point is, every time you jam up a processor, you become a better operator. You learn what your machine can and can't do. The same thing with your logs. You get one fussy log, and you got to mess with that thing for a half hour to finally get it through the processor. You've just become a better operator. You just can't sit back and just be detached from the machine. You have to operate it. It's kind of like, I think we would all agree, a person who's new to off-roading with a four-wheel drive truck, they're going to get stuck. They're going to get stuck in the mud. People that are just more experienced driving them, they've been down the road, they know what it's like, they know what the truck can and can't do, they don't get stuck as much. You know what I mean? Same thing with processors. Every little thing that happens with the processor is feedback. You have to learn from them. And I think when I brag about the 405, it has never once jammed on me, and that's the truth. It never has jammed on me, but I think that's also because I'm experienced with a processor. I can see a problem coming down the way, and if this log looks like it's going to be tough, I throw it out. That last video I did, I believe I left it in the edits. There was just this ugly log. I know for a fact this machine would make mincemeat out of that log, but I just knew that it would make ugly firewood and it was going to tear it all to pieces because of the big knot that was inside of it. So I just threw it into my offcuts. Why mess with it? You know, I still need my offcuts to heat my own house. So that was my decision making on that. But the secret to these processors are your logs. If you do not have processor logs, you're going to have long days. They're still going to run them. It's just going to take you a lot of extra effort. All of the time, all of the enjoyment that you get from running a processor, you get it from prepping your logs. And if you were to look at these logs, there's a number of them where I've cut knots off of them right here. I've taken measurements just to make sure that it's going to fit. I know I got a 16-inch max, but even at 16-inch, that log's got to be pretty darn straight or it's going to give you some headaches. And over the years, you can see where I have been banging this with logs coming in that just get hooked up on it. But for the 405, guys, I'm serious. This machine is awesome. I can look anyone in the eye and tell you that this machine is just world class. Now, there are a couple things that I would improve about it. Number one, I think these guides should be painted red. I think these are pinch points. And the very first thing I ever did loading a log was I pinched my finger here because you can't see them. There's no contrast. And I forgot all about that until my brother-in-law ran this machine. And what do you think the first thing that happened to him was? He got his finger smashed in here. The other one is, I think this approach needs to have an extension so that it overlaps. And you might see me when I'm operating this, I'll reach over and pull the log because they keep getting hooked right here. The other thing, if I were to criticize the 405, but it has a happy ending, it's been the oiler. If you recall, my oiler lost its prime. This was back at my old wood yard, and I took the fitting off, and I didn't know that on this side, there's a spring that goes in, and there's a BB that sits right here. On this side, there's a BB back inside, and then the spring sits on top of it, and it works like a valve. So one's suction, one's discharge. If you recall, when I was working on it, I had dropped the spring, I lost the BB, and then I wound up stepping on top of the spring and smashing it. Anyhow, they sent me the tubing, but the tubing wouldn't fit in this, what is that, inner diameter snake bite kind of a fitting. So we decided to try this fish aquarium tubing and use these barbed fittings. And it works fine on the suction side, but the discharge is just too much pressure and it was cracking this. It was splitting it open and I was losing my prime. Anyhow, trial and error, and 100 times of me taking these fittings off and figuring out how these springs work and the BBs. And we finally found the correct size tubing that works with this style of fitting. I am here to tell you my oiling problems are solved. I am now an expert on Japa oiling systems. But because of this learning experience with the Japa oiler, I have started leaving this guard off. You know, this guard's supposed to fit on here like this. And I just prefer that it's not even on here now because I like to see my fittings. When I was still trying to figure out this fitting, you know, we had the wrong size line. It was blowing out and it was kinking the spring inside of it. What a mess. But now we got everything correct. And I'm serious. I probably have my last 15 runs I haven't even primed this once, and that was part of my pre-trip inspection. I would always prime up the oiler, and you do that by removing this little set screw, and I would just shove like an Allen key in there and push on that plunger, and that would charge the oiling system on the saw motor, but I don't have to do it anymore. Got it figured out. I believe I have, the meter says I have, I think 210 hours on it. And it says I have made 230 cords of firewood, which to me, I think sounds a little high. And I think early on I had felt it was overestimating its output. And I did some adjustments to the parameters to tone it down. And I think it's pretty close. But I think, you know, if this is telling me I'm obviously making a cord in under an hour, I would have to agree with it. That's how fast this machine is. And not only that, but the finished product. It's awesome, man. There's no resplitting. And it's just gorgeous wood. It's ideal for my style of firewood. It's ideal for my restaurants and for my customers. This thing here, I'm serious, guys. If you if you are going to run a firewood business the way I do, I can't think of a more perfect machine than the 405. Okay, so I need to fork all of these baskets and get them dumped. I got to put my panels back on, get my conveyor back up, and we're ready for firewood next week. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope everyone has a great day.